Last week I did an unboxing of my new A.Gallo tubed paints, and so many of you in the comments asked me to swatch them on camera for you. And so in today's video, that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to start with the tubes because I want to put these in a smaller travel palette. And I have this empty Art Toolkit palette with some extra pans. So I'm going to arrange and pour them in there, and also swatch them on the sheet that they supply. The A.Gallo swatch sheets are 100% cotton Fabriano paper, so they actually give you a really good indication of what the paints are going to look like. I'll monitor things like how long they take to dry, and then I'll also swatch out the Naturale pan set because I know many people were curious about that. And I did get the 24 set, so there are 14 extra colors than are available in the tubes at the moment. So I'll swatch those out, and then on a separate sheet, I'm going to compare the two together side by side so we can see exactly how similar the tubes are to the pans. So make yourself a cuppa and let's get started. The A.Gallo paints are handmade in Italy using a traditional recipe with raw pigments, gum arabic, local honey, and rosemary essential oil. Until recently, they were only available to purchase in hand-poured pans, which were absolutely beautiful, but it meant that I couldn't put them in a travel palette. But now they've introduced a selection of tubes. This set of Naturale paints is a range of earth and mineral colors. I'm really excited about them because they're so soft and subtle. They all have excellent light fastness, and most of them are single pigments. So that is a big appeal to me because it means that when I mix colors together, there's going to be more color harmony, and I'm also going to be able to better predict what kind of results I'm going to get. I'm really excited to have a travel palette with these paints. I've been using these Art Toolkit palettes for about a year now, and they're so ideal for traveling because they are really portable and slimlined, and you can fit them literally in your pocket, but you can also put them in any portable art wrap or art bag or whatever it is that you use to carry your art supplies. They come pre-assembled with an assortment of different sized pans. And if you're not familiar with these, there's a magnet underneath that each of the individual pans attaches to. So it means that it could be like a Tetris. You can mix and match them, or you can use different sizes, and you can add and subtract colors at your heart's content. So you're not committed to any one layout, which I really like about them. I want to pour each one of these tubes into this standard size pan because I really like this size the best. It means that I can fit a paintbrush in there quite comfortably and it holds quite a bit of paint. I'm going to write the name of each color with a permanent marker on the bottom so that I can remember which color each one is. My method for filling these is really quite simple. I just have a washcloth and some toothpicks for spreading the paint in the little pans. And then I have a jar of water for anything I need to clean. And because I'll be stirring it with the toothpicks, I will take whatever paint is left over on that, and I'll do a little swatch on the card immediately so that I can see what they look like and how those compare to the swatches on the tubes. I haven't mentioned yet in this video, but one of the really exciting features about the way A.Gallo does their paints, and they do this with both the pans as well as the tubes, is that the labels are actually made with watercolor paper, and the color in the tube or in the pan is hand painted on that paper. So it will be interesting to see how my little swatch compares with what I see on the tubes. This first one is Gold Ochre. It's made with pigment yellow 43. It has an excellent light fastness, as do all of these, and it's a transparent color. The smell is absolutely heavenly. It smells a little bit like, I don't know, an expensive apothecary, if that makes sense. It's the smell of the rosemary, but there's a little bit more than that. And I think it's the acacia and the honey mixing with the rosemary that makes it smell really nice. I've never smelled a paint that smells as nice as this. The consistency is really smooth. It's not too thick. There aren't any lumps. And I've really not even put a dent in this tube by adding it to this little tiny pan. And look at that. It goes down beautifully. In fact, I'm really shocked because it looks exactly like the swatch on the tube. In fact, I mean, it's just, you almost don't need to swatch them, although obviously I'm going to, so that I have little swatches that I can look at separately. But look at this. Stunning. Obviously, it's not dry yet, but it's identical. That is so cool. I've never had a watercolor tube before where the color on the label actually looks like the color that you're going to swatch it with, so this is really exciting. And it's not even new because honestly, the A.Gallo pans are the same way, but it's just, they're such an outstanding company. It's this attention to detail is one of the things that I really love about them. In addition, of course, to the fact that these colors are beautiful. The next color is Raw Sienna, which is one of my favorite earth colors, especially for mixing greens in nature. Where I live in England, this color mixed with any of my blues will get me some beautiful, natural looking greens. This Raw Sienna is made with PY43 and it's semi-transparent, which is a little bit different than the Raw Siennas that I'm accustomed to using, which are more transparent. So I'm really interested to see how this one compares. It says Raw Sienna Badia, which I think maybe means that that's the region that it's from. I've put a little bit more into the pan this time because I needed to add more to the gold ochre. I was a little bit too stingy, and this amount seems to have been perfect. And again, the smell is incredible, and it's really nice and creamy and smooth. Again, this one really beautifully matches the label. I like the color. It's a little bit darker and a little bit, I think it's that semi-transparency that makes it a little bit more opaque than what I'm used to. So I'm really interested to see how this one actually mixes with the different blues especially. This one is the Moroccan Red Ochre. It's made with PR102, Pigment Red 102. And this one is a semi-opaque, which means that it's probably going to have more coverage than what I'm used to. I'm thinking it might be similar to Winsor & Newton's English Red or Light Red in that it's sort of like a burnt sienna or a transparent red oxide, but it's a little bit earthier, like a terracotta color. But let's swatch it and find out. Again, it smells heavenly, and the swatch is pretty much identical to what's on the tube. I do like this color. It would be a nice addition. I wouldn't use it, I don't think, for a limited palette because it's semi-opaque. But if I had a palette that was a bit more extensive, like this one, it would be really nice for adding touches of that terracotta or that earth red color that you can see in the landscape. This is the More Alone. It's Pigment Red 101, and it also is a semi-opaque color. I've never used a Pigment Red 101 that is such a maroon color, so I'm interested in seeing how this one looks in mixes as well. It has a bit of a maroon look to it, so I'm curious to see, again, how this goes. I've really never used a color that's this dark and maroon, and if I didn't know that it was Pigment Red 101, I would swear that it was maybe even a pigment violet. It is a really earthy color, and it might be a good one for neutralizing greens, but again, I have to wait until I swatch it and mix it with other colors to see how it is in action, but it's a very interesting color. Next up is the Potter's Pink. This one is made with Pigment Red 233, and it's a semi-transparent color. It's really interesting the way that it pours into the pan. It has almost a metallic sheen to it, and it's really lovely. I'm used to a Potter's Pink that looks a little bit darker when it's poured out into a pan, so this one actually definitely looks like a pink. And I think this is such a unique color. When my daughter did her GCSE in art, she did an entire sketchbook using just Potter's Pink and Payne's Gray. Of course, those were the Winsor & Newton variety. But those two colors together were really beautiful. And wow, this one is so pretty to paint with. I really like how subtle it is. I think it's my favorite Potter's Pink of any one I've ever used. It reminds me of the pink cheeks you would see on an old China doll. And I've got to say right now, all of these swatch so nicely. There's no streakiness. Even if I go back in and add water or a little bit more pigment, they just blend in really nicely. And another thing that I have to say about all of these colors is you wouldn't even need to add much to them because they just truly look so natural. Next up is the Copper Blue. And this is not a color that I probably would ever choose on my own if it wasn't included in a set because it has 4 pigments in it, including a pigment white 4. But it might be a really fun color, just a little extra color to have and use every once in a while. Especially for cooler leaves, maybe. I'd be hesitant to mix too much into this to darken it or alter it because there are already a staggering 4 pigments in there. But wow, look at how beautiful of a color it is. If you're somebody who likes to paint in a style that's a little bit more design-like, this would be a gorgeous accent color. I can definitely see why they included this one in the set because it's just so different and beautiful. The colors in this are Pigment White 4, Pigment Green 7, Pigment Blue 15-3, which is used in Phthalo, and Pigment Yellow 3. It's listed as a semi-opaque color. It goes down really nicely. I expected it to be a little patchier, but the mixing of it is just really perfect. In fact, I would never believe that there were 4 pigments in here if I didn't know it. Next up is the Lapis Lazuli, which is a genuine color, meaning that it's made from the actual stone. And this is definitely an ancient color. It was very common in early egg tempera paintings. And this is the first one where, when it comes out, actually has some of the binder that comes out with it, which is very common with other brands, but it's the first one. This is the 7th color that I'm swatching, and it's the first one that actually had any extra binder. So I have a feeling that this one might sink in and maybe need a top up in a day or so, but we'll check back with it. And I'm not sure how that will affect the swatching because I feel like there's a little bit too much binder. So I actually put the cap back on and kneaded it a little bit to hopefully mix it in a little better, but it didn't really seem to make a difference. So this might be one that's going to sink in and where I'll need to add a second coat to it. We'll check back on it in a day or two. So let's see how that swatches in comparison to the label. And I do think that that extra binder is making it go down a little bit more thin or watery than it would if it was properly mixed in. This is listed as a semi-transparent color, and this is the first one where the swatch doesn't look exactly like what is on the tube. But again, I'll compare that once it's dried and probably once I add a little top up to that. And this could be user error. This could totally be something that I could have fixed before I poured it out. So we'll have to wait and see. And I think actually it is possibly going to dry to look a little bit more bright than it does right now when it's still wet. So we're going to check back on this one. And also this is one that I'm interested to compare to the pan. This is the Green Earth Warm. It's made with pigment green 23 and it's listed as semi-transparent. It looks like it's a really beautiful earthy green, maybe a bit of a cross between like a chromium oxide and a sap green. It's kind of somewhere in between that range. And this one is thicker than the other ones. So all of the other ones have had a similar consistency as they've poured into these little pans, but this one is a little bit thicker. That's not a bad thing. It's just an observation. And if I didn't know that it was semi-transparent, I would think based on that it might actually be more of a semi-opaque, but let's go ahead and swatch it and see. Actually, I take it back about saying that I thought it might be a little bit more on the opaque side. It definitely feels like a semi-transparent as I'm doing the swatch, and I really like it. Their chromium oxide color is much thicker and darker, and this feels like a more natural light version of that, even though it is a completely different pigment. But I do like it. And again, even just looking at all of these colors next to each other, they're such beautiful complements to one another, which you don't always get in a set. Sometimes you'll get lots of random colors, but then when you paint with them together, they don't go together. But these definitely all go nicely together. And doing a little color chart with these is going to be a lot of fun. Next up is the Green Umber. And I've got to say, this one on the label is really interesting. It looks like a little bit of a cross between a burnt umber and a sepia color. So that's going to be a lot of fun to explore. It's made with Pigment Brown 8, and it's a semi-transparent color. And this one, like the Green Earth Warm, is going into the pan a little bit thicker than those ones in the other row. The Gold Ochre, Raw Sienna, Moroccan Red Ochre, Moralone, and Potter's Pink, and even the Copper Blue. So this one is much more similar coming out of the tube to the consistency of the Green Umber. And that probably has something to do, obviously, with the pigments. But it doesn't feel thick. It still feels very smooth and very easy to mix. This one goes down really nicely. I mean, I've got to say, again, I know I've said it already, but all of these colors blend really well on the paper. And that's not something that often happens with paint. And I do really like this color. This is one I might use because it's a little bit more subtle. I think that green tint in this might dominate a little bit less in mixes. And I know it's not dry here yet, but it is one of the ones that's looking a little bit lighter than the swatch on the tube. But that's probably because I didn't add enough pigment to my sample. The final color is Roman Black Earth. It's made with Pigment Black 11, and it is a semi-transparent color. Black is not a color that I use, really. But since it did come in this set, it will be fun to swatch it, and maybe I can be persuaded to have it as a little bit of an extra to add different touches to my paints every once in a while. I am filming in natural light, and the light is quickly diminishing from my window. So we need to get this one done quickly and then wait until tomorrow to swatch the 24 set because I want everything to look natural. It's been a crazy day here in England. It started with the sun peeking over the trees in the distance in a very misty sky, and then it went away completely, and we had this monsoon type rain, complete with thunder and lightning, which again is very rare for where I live. And then the sun came out again, super bright, unnaturally bright. And now it's gone to just feeling like a typical English day in January. And the consistency of this paint is similar to those first 6, so it's not as thick as the Green Earth Warm and the Green Umber. I like this color when it's a little bit thinner and more transparent. But I did find it a little bit more difficult to mix and to fiddle with after the fact, the way I was so effortlessly able to do with every one of these other colors. But again, we'll see how that compares to the swatch of the pan. But again, this one is going to be interesting to mix with other colors, especially I think the Gold Ochre and maybe even the Potter's Pink. So these are all the colors swatched. Most of them are already dry except for the Roman Black Earth. And here they are in the pans. You can see that some of the early ones already look like they're drying quite nicely. And I'm going to leave this open overnight and we'll check back tomorrow and see how dry they are. It's been about 24 hours since I poured them, and most of them are drying beautifully. They feel dry to touch. I know some people were concerned that because they have honey in them that they might be sticky, but there's absolutely no stickiness at all on any of these, except this one feels a little bit just like it's not dry yet, but it doesn't feel sticky or wet. And this was the Lapis Lazuli, which I was worried about. And it seems to be drying a bit unevenly, but I think that was user error. So I did do some kneading of the tube again, and I poured a second pan just to do a test to see if maybe it was my fault. And with the second pan, I did stir it up a lot better. And it's only been a few hours and already it just looks so much better. So I think we're going to disregard that one and eventually just replace it with this one. The only one that really seems to be cracking is this Green Earth Warm, which if you remember was a little bit thicker. So if I add some more to this in the future, maybe I'll add just a drop or so of gum arabic. And there is a little bit of bubbling, but I have a feeling that's because I just didn't stir them well enough. And that's obviously not a problem at all anyway. But there's very little shrinking, which is nice. And the last time I checked on these was a few hours ago, and I felt like maybe they could use another day. But honestly, if I push on these, they feel pretty hard. They don't feel soft like they're still drying. Maybe the copper blue could use a little bit longer, and obviously that could use a bit longer. This feels completely dry. But yeah, I think these are just about ready to swatch. I did purchase some other tubes because I'm interested in curating a tiny palette for tiny painting. And so I wanted to try out some of the yellows and reds and blues. And I also poured those into pans yesterday. I didn't film it, but they're here. And these also feel very dry to touch, with the exception of the burnt umber dark, which I just made the mistake of touching. So you could see I created a little bit of an imperfection there. But all of these other ones feel really dry. None of them feel tacky. And yeah, they're all ready to go. So I just thought I'd give you a little glimpse of that. This one is drying a little bit drier than the others, and that's the royal yellow. I'll knead that again and see if that makes a difference, or just add a bit of gum arabic the next time I top it up. And if you want to see these colors, I'll link the original unboxing in the description here, and you can go and see which ones I chose and why. I'm going to do a quick swatching of the 24 set of pans, and I'm not going to really talk about those because the main purpose of this video is to compare the pans to the tubes, and there are only 10 from this set that are available in tubes. I've made this little spread in my swatching sketchbook, and I'll put a little swatch for each of the colors there. And then I've made this chart so that I can compare all of the pans right next to the tubes for each of the ones where I have both. So I'll be adding those here in just a minute. I've opened all the pans for the Naturale 24 set, and I've swatched them on the swatch card that they include, and also in my sketchbook. And if you want to watch that a little more in depth, I've posted a video over on my Patreon. And I've underlined the colors where I have an accompanying tube. So I'm going to take all of those colors and swatch them on my color sheet, and then compare them to a swatch from the tubes. It's now been 2 days or 48 hours since I poured these pans, so let's do another check-in. I think, again, there's been a little bit more sinking in on a few of the colors. So this potter's pink and this copper blue, but overall there hasn't been a lot of shrinkage. Again, this color, which is the green earth warm, has cracked a little bit more, which is not surprising. Once they start to crack, they generally will crack a bit more. And then this is the other set of the tubes that I poured into pans, and this royal yellow also had some cracking. There also are a few that have had a little bit of bubbling, but I'm going to blame myself for that because they poured into the pan so nicely that I really didn't do a lot of stirring. So in future, I would make sure to stir them a lot more. Also, you may notice that this is the second pan that I poured of the lapis lazuli. So this one has only had about 24 hours or 1 day to cure. And compared to that first one, which wasn't mixed in as well, it just feels a bit more settled, and like the distribution between the binder and the pigment is better. And I don't really think that's a problem with A.Gallo. I mean, I'm not a paint maker, but I would imagine that when you're making paint using genuine stones, there might be a little bit more separation and just more kneading required before you actually pour that paint. So I'm going to actually use the second one I poured instead of the original one because I feel like it's more blended. And again, this one is an example where I really stirred it well and there isn't any bubbling. So I do feel like those slight air bubbles are just because I didn't really stir things well enough. And then again, these are the other ones that I poured. That burnt umber has finally dried. And I did swatch all of these already, and I compared them to the pans of the same color that I already had. So let me show you that. So here's my comparison sheet. And these aren't filled in yet because we're going to do these together in just a minute. But I thought I'd take a second and just show you the comparison of these colors. And I have to say, overall, I'm really impressed with the consistency between the pans that come from A.Gallo and the ones that I created from the tubes. There are a few subtle differences in a few of the colors. There are some slight color differences between the burnt umber in the pan and the tube. I feel like the one in the tube is a little bit browner and the one that comes in the pan is a little bit darker, but very similar. The royal yellow, I feel, is my user error because I think there was a little bit of contamination in the pan. And that's why I've gone ahead and I've created a solid block of colors to compare on the right of each swatch, just to give a better indication of how similar the colors are. Because when I did that, the colors are nearly identical. So I would say that is very similar. The Azo yellow I really liked. I don't have a lot of experience with this color. Sadly, it's not available as a pan from the factory, so I only have this tube, but I'm feeling that because these are similar, I may go with just one yellow and then maybe one of the Naturale colors in my limited palette. The Scarlet Red, again, very similar, as is the Permanent Carmine. I feel like maybe the Permanent Carmine in the tube is a little bit brighter, which I actually like and prefer. The Perylene Maroon is one that's different between the pan and the tube. And I don't think it's because there was any contamination from me mixing paints into it previously, although maybe a little bit, because when I compared the blocks side by side, they are much more similar. So because this is a dark color, I thought it was clean. User error. I really should have taken the time to make sure all my pans were completely free of other colors. But I feel like the one in the tube, again, it's a bit brighter. It's a bit more red. This Perylene Maroon Pigment Red 179 is one that some manufacturers use for their alizarin crimson. So I don't know. I might actually prefer this more than I thought I would. We'll see how it looks when I do mixes. The transparent cerulean is a little bit different. I felt like the tube is a lot more bright and more transparent, but the color is the same, more or less. And again, I didn't really like the transparent cerulean as a pan to use for my cooler blue, but I am really loving this tube version. It's very similar to a phthalo. I love its transparency, and I think that one's going to be a keeper for me. And then these other four are virtually identical. So the Ultramarine Blue Deep, the Periwinkle, the Dioxazine Violet, and the Naturno, they're all very much the same between the pans and the tubes. So that is really nice to see. So again, I would say so far, everything is very consistent between the pan or the tube. The only ones with subtle differences are the Burnt Umber, the Perylene Maroon, and a little bit of this transparent cerulean. But with that said, let's move on now to comparing the Naturale Tubes versus the pans. First up is the Gold Ochre. This is a really pretty color, and I know it's called gold ochre, but it actually behaves a lot like a yellow ochre would. One thing that I wish they did on their labels is I wish that they put whether or not it was transparent or semi-transparent, and they don't. You have to go to the website for that to look it up. So I'm going to save you the time and do that for you. Both the tubes and the pans are transparent. I feel like the tube is a little bit brighter. We'll see how it is when it dries. On the website, it says that Italian Gold Ochre is a brilliant, transparent yellow earth from natural Italian earth pigment. So if you can't afford to go to Italy, you can at least paint with earth from Italy. The Raw Sienna Badia is a different one than the Raw Sienna. A.Gallo does make a different Raw Sienna. It says that this one is an intense natural yellow earth from the historical mine in Badia, containing silica and clay, hydrous forms of iron oxide, and traces of manganese carbonate. It's a beautiful neutral orange yellow. Like I've said before, I really do love Raw Sienna. I'm interested to see how this one is because it is a slightly different version. It's Pigment Yellow 43. And so far as it's going on, I feel like it's a little bit brighter. In fact, both the Gold Ochre and the Raw Sienna feel a little bit brighter as I'm painting them, but that could just be because they're wet. And when they dry, they may be absolutely identical to the pans. So we'll have to hold off on our final judgment until we're completely done swatching everything and it all has time to dry. This is the Moroccan red ochre, and I really wish they made this in a hand-poured pan instead of only the tubes because it's a beautiful color. In fact, I'm really curious to see how this one mixes with an ultramarine or a phthalo color because I don't have a burnt sienna or a transparent red oxide or anything like that available to me at the moment in the tubes. So I'm looking for something that's going to do the job. Because if you've seen any of my painting videos before, you'll probably know that I absolutely love having an earthy red to mix with my blues. It's my go-to mixture. This one comes from Morocco, and it says it's renowned for its unique composition and vibrant hues, making it a prized natural pigment. It has intense earthy red tones with a warm, natural look. And I would have to concur with that. Again, another one I'm really excited to mix with. The Morellone is made with Pigment Red 101, and this one is semi-opaque in both the tube and the pan. It's a really deep purplish color, not one that I'm used to using, but I'm open to exploring it. Especially when I read this on the website, it says that Morellone is a powerful, opaque iron oxide pigment that tends towards deep purple. In medieval painting, this pigment was often used in the underpainting of azurite blue skies. I mean, that sounds like it's a lot of fun to try the next time I have to paint a moody sky or a really purplish sky. The Potter's Pink is semi-transparent in both forms. It's made with Pigment Red 233. And painting this again, I just really love this color. I think it would be really nice for glazing over other colors because it is very transparent to apply. I know it says that it's semi-transparent, but it really feels like a transparent color. And it's very easy to get a thin wash of it. It seems to want to go down a little bit more transparently. And again, this is the one that was invented around 1780 by a potter in Staffordshire. And it's my favorite Potter's Pink of any brand that I have ever seen or tried, hands down. This copper blue is so pretty. It's semi-opaque, and it is the one that's made with 4 different pigments. So normally I would steer away from something with that many pigments, but they do say that it's their non-hazardous alternative to the corrosive and toxic color made from actual copper. And it's semi-transparent and light fast. So I can see where it would be a really useful color to have, especially if you're somebody who likes to paint with more modern colors or you like to paint designs that are a little bit more bright and cheerful. This could be a really beautiful color. I don't think I'll use this for a limited palette, but I definitely love to have it for an extended palette. The lapis lazuli is semi-transparent, and it's made from genuine stone. I want to read to you what A.Gallo says on their website because it's just such a perfect description. They say they have an exclusive source for their premium extra fine lapis lazuli. The pigment is the purest and most expertly extracted lapis lazuli that we have ever encountered, and we're excited to bring it to you. And then they go on to say that all of their lapis lazuli watercolors in both their palettes and their pans are now made with this exquisite Fra Angelico blue pigment. This historic color is made by grinding semi-precious lapis lazuli stones into a powder and extracting the purest pigment in small artisan batches. Lapis lazuli is an intense deep blue color made from the semi-precious stone used in historical painting. It's a semi-transparent, medium-grained color with moderate tinting strength, intense granulating, and extra fine. The stone has been mined for 6,000 years. Ultramarine was the finest and most expensive blue used by Renaissance painters. It was often used for the robes of the Virgin Mary, symbolizing holiness. And artificial ultramarine was invented in 1828, and then that became a more popular color to use. But this is such a pretty color, and I really don't think I've ever used an ultramarine blue that's come close to replicating this exact color. It feels more like a cobalt to me. That said, I don't know if I would use it in the place of ultramarine because I'm not sure that it would be as easy to mix with other colors. but it would definitely be great for an extra color. And again, I may change my mind once I actually start mixing it with other colors. And I'm using the second pan that I poured only 24 hours ago, and it's definitely wetting much better than that one that I hadn't stirred thoroughly enough. The green earthworm is semi-transparent and made with pigment green 23. I was a little bit worried because of the cracking and the fact that it was a little bit thicker, that maybe it wouldn't be a very close match to the pan, but in practice it seems to go down very similarly. And I'm not having any trouble with that. So I think in future, I would just stir it a little bit better to try to avoid any cracking and then add a little bit more. In fact, I'll probably go in and add a little touch up to this. But again, as I paint with this and add water, that cracking will become minimal. This is listed as a genuine green earth with a brilliant hue. And as I'm looking out the window while I paint, I definitely see this color in the nature around me. And I like the fact that it's a single pigment color, but it still looks really natural. The green umber is semi-transparent. It's made with pigment brown 8. And I want to read you what they said on the website because it really does put this color into perspective for me. They call it an Italian raw umber, which actually makes me more excited about this color because raw umber, if in case you don't know, makes some really beautiful, cooler shadows. And they say Italian raw umber is a natural, inorganic pigment with a greenish hue. The name umber probably derives from the Latin ombra or shadow, referring to their use as shadow pigments in Renaissance painting. So again, I've really been exploring a lot more with raw umber recently. And so again, this is one of the ones that will be really fun to mix. The Roman black earth is made with pigment black 11, which I don't have a lot of experience with, and it's semi-transparent. They say that Roman black earth is a beautiful granulating neutral black. This natural black oxide is useful for creating textured landscapes and stone textures. Again, I really don't like using black in paintings because I feel like it becomes very dominant and makes things look a little bit more flat. But as a mixing color, it could be interesting. This is not probably one that I'm going to use a lot, but for those of you who do like to use black, hopefully this is informative. I do know that blacks mixed with different yellows can make some really beautiful greens. And I also used to have my students do an exercise where they used the Zorn palette, which is a combination of yellow ochre, ivory black, and vermilion. And then if you're using oil paints, you would also use titanium white. And it might be fun to experiment with a type of Zorn palette using some of these colors. So maybe this color and the gold ochre and one of the reds, either the Potter's Pink or maybe the Permanent Carmine. So I'm going to experiment with this color. I don't mean to sound negative about it. I'm sure it will make some beautiful mixes. All of the tubes from the Naturale set have had plenty of time to dry, and they all look exactly the same as the pans, which is a really exciting discovery. And it's probably useful if you're considering maybe buying some of the tubes to either top up your pans or to create a travel palette, as I'm planning to do. I'm hoping that this information is useful to you. I love all of these colors so much, and I can't wait to put them in a travel palette. So stay tuned. And let me know in the comments if you would like to see how I choose the colors and put that together. And if you've tried the tubes yet, or if you have any other colors that you love of theirs that I should add to my collection. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your support and you watching this far if you're still here. I hope that you all have a beautiful day with many happy painting adventures ahead of you. Happy painting!